is Professor Nikolaos Tzifakis. I'm from the University of the Peloponnese, the coordinator of GEO-POWER. I'll use a couple of minutes just to present the project, and I'll pass back the floor to Tijana to moderate this discussion. Can we move on, Filip? Yeah. So what is GEO-POWER? We're a consortium of 14 universities and research centers from different European countries, from the Western Balkans, Eastern Partnership countries, and EU members. You are seeing the consortium that we're implementing. We're implementing an Horizon Europe project that has as a topic how we can contribute to empower the EU to manage security threats within the deteriorating geopolitical environment that lies in the Eastern neighborhood and in the Western Balkans. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Filip? I'm just presenting you here our website and our social media accounts. I'm inviting you to visit our website, to follow our social media accounts, to stay informed. This is a project that started in June 2024. There are many things coming in the next months, such as a foresight exercises, a few indices, and works on corrosive capital and disinformation. But if we move, please, Filip, again the slide, you can already remark several publications which are uploaded on our site, which are about the enlargement policy, the future of Eastern Partnership, the EU defense cooperation, and also the public opinion survey, whose Serbia part will be presented later on. And the last slide, Filip. Also, in our site, you'll see our database, which was, by the way, presented first in Belgrade last May. And this is a user-friendly site where you can find much info about the linkages between the 6 Western Balkan countries and the 3 Eastern Partnership countries on the one hand, and on the other hand, the EU, the United States, Russia, China, and Turkey, across several sectors in terms of in the economic sector, in the political sector, in the security and societal sector. Without any more delay, I'll pass back the floor to Tijana. Thank you again thanks Filip and the University of Belgrade for organizing this event, and all of you for attending it.
Thank you, Professor Tzifakis. So we are now moving to the working part of today's presentation. So before we move on to the major findings, which are today focused on the results from Serbia, I would kindly like to ask Mr. Boge Bozinovski, the research manager in INDAGO, one of the 2 agencies which conducted the fieldwork, Newton Research Europe and INDAGO, to tell us something more about the research methodology, the survey methodology.
Thank you, Tijana. So the target population of this research was the general population in Serbia, aged 18 years and plus, and living in the country. We used a stratified multi-stage probability-based approach to achieve the representative sample. In this approach, the population, according to the last census conducted in Serbia 2022, was stratified first by region, statistical region, 4 regions in Serbia, and place of living, urban and rural, before the random selection of the telephone numbers. The data collection method was computer-assisted telephone interviewing, and the sample was structured to reflect major sociodemographics in Serbian population by gender and age. The final instrument consisted of approximately 40 questions in total, including screening questions, about 30 core substantive questions, which we will discuss during this presentation, divided in 5 thematic areas: sources of information, economy and migration, EU and NATO, external actors, and elections, political orientations of the citizens in Serbia. And plus we have demographic questions at the end of the interview to see the sample structure. And Filip, next slide, we can see the demographic in terms of region. As I said, 4 regions in Serbia. The sample split was as follows in these 4 regions. In Belgrade, we have 25% of the sample. In Vojvodina, 26%. Western Serbia and Šumadija, 27%. And Eastern and Southern Serbia, 21% of the total sample. Regarding the next slide, please, regarding the age of respondents, Also following the latest census data of population in Serbia, as we can see on this slide, from 18 to 24 years old, we have 9% of the sample. And then we have 14% of the sample with respondents aged between 25 and 34. And equally 17% each for the following next 3 age groups from 35 to 64 years old. And finally, in the oldest age group, 65 plus years old, we had 27% of the sample. Next slide, please. Thank you. Regarding the gender of the sample, 52% were female and 48% were male respondents. And on the next slide, we will see the employment status of the respondents in the sample. So nearly 1/3 of the sample were persons employed in the private sector, 30%. And also the same percentage we have respondents who are at the moment of interviewing retired, 30%. And the other distribution, as you can see on this slide, we have respondents employed in public sector, self-employed 10%, unemployed 9%, and student 4%. Finally, we have, I think, regarding the marital status. So half of the respondents in the sample are married, 8% live with a partner, 6% divorced, 19% single, and 12% widow. So at the end, we have the ethnicity. 90% of the sample were Serbian. This and the rest 10% are split with smaller percentages of other ethnic groups in Serbia, like Hungarian 1.2, Bosnian 1.6, etc. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's show the sample structure. As I said at the beginning, should reflect, and it reflects the major socio-demographic of the population in the country by region, place of living, gender, and age. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We might come back with some additional questions or clarifications, and that's also we would also like to ask our audience if you have questions. We'll start now with the presentations of the survey findings, and then following a brief presentation, we'll also have some key findings from the social media sentiment analysis presented by Dr. Panagiotis Paschalidis, and then later we'll have the discussant remarks by Dr. Sonja Stojanovic-Gajic. And we'll have the time for the Q&A session. Please, if you have any immediate impressions or questions, you can use also chat for writing down the questions so you don't forget them, or for us not to forget them. Okay, so we'll now start with the brief presentations of the major sections of the findings from Serbia. The first part gives us a story about the information environment in Serbia, and in that sense we can see from the first slide that the situation in Serbia in terms of how people inform themselves about political developments in the country, we see kind of hybrid situation that the TV channels and internet portals and social media are all relevant, different to some other countries in the region according to this survey, such as Albania, when we do see a very predominance of TV as a source of informing on the political developments. And on the other hand, some other countries, for instance, Georgia, where social media are highly dominant in Serbia, both sources have their role. We do what we see, and it actually reflects a broader regional pattern as well, is that the blue chart says what is the first mention, and then the yellow captures the second in total. So if they are mentioned at all, so we can see that there is this general pattern of information diffusing in a way in social media and internet portals, and then being double-checked through traditional more sources such as TV. We do also have the 6% of non-informed, which is kind of a regional average. In terms of the language, Serbia is not really a super interesting case, in a sense that, similar to actually Albania, this is a highly monolingual information environment, in a sense that the majority of the population follows the media in news in Serbian language, and with a slight majority, I think that's in the following slide, also relying on sources in English. The situation in this sense is different in the neighboring countries, but this is something we can maybe leave for discussion. This is the data I mentioned, about 20% relying on the sources in English as well. As for the specific media or source of information the Serbian public considers, we might actually start from the 27% of public which does not rely on any source of information, which in a way suggests this erosion of trust in the sources of information. This is, in this case, Serbia is somewhere in the middle in comparison to other countries in the region and the associated trio we explored where the survey was conducted: Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. There are some cases such as Montenegro and Bosnia when this percentage is almost double, 40+%. But then it is still a high percent, showing a huge reservoir of distrust in the information available to the public. Then we see that this polarized, in a way, the situation we could expect, in the sense that the national broadcaster RTS 1 and then the dominant private we would say anti-regime, maybe prominent media, and Jedan has 13%. They divide this. We see that this competition for the public attention, comparison to some previous surveys from the previous years. Maybe this is something we can also discuss later. This is a slightly changed situation with the fall of the lower percentage of people naming RTS, the national broadcaster, as their dominant source. Okay. With this question is actually very important in this survey in general. This, as in later analysis, further statistical analysis, it usually has a very high statistical relevance for the voting patterns as well. And this is something which has, again, changed in comparison to some previous surveys from some previous years. The overall satisfaction with the situation in the country, as you can see, is quite a gloomy one, with 47% being to a certain extent dissatisfied with the ongoing situation, and 25%, like a quarter of the public, being within satisfied. As you can see, there is also this significant share of public which is neither nor. Again, as I said, this is the question which does have is a huge indicator also of voting patterns in generally. And in comparison to the other countries, again, Serbia is somewhere in average. How good or bad the status of the following listed values in Serbia is. The pattern seen here for Serbia is quite similar across the region. Freedom of speech in almost all countries we've surveyed scores the highest, although this is the mean of 3.1, not extremely high but not low. And then you can see then with the rest of the economic and the governance and the rule of law situation being not a great one, not great, not terrible. Then we can move to the following slide. Here the situation slightly changes in terms of how the public in Serbia sees the future in general. And as you can see here, there is a 40% of the public being optimistic. There is some cautious optimism in Serbia in this regard. In this sense, the Serbian public is more optimistic than the rest of the countries in the region, the majority of the countries in the region. in comparison, however, to closer to the associated trio, which maybe we can somehow later discuss in what brings to where this hope comes from, and as this is also one of the indicators which have changed in comparison to some previous surveys from previous years, maybe capturing the current political momentum in the country. And maybe just briefly on the previous slide as well, the share of which cannot be sufficiently emphasized in all of these questions is always this large share of a neither nor, or in this case the public which believes that everything will be the same, which is again incredibly important, since it suggests this in a way fatigue or this skepticism about all the reforms happening in the country, induced both from below or by the EU. Yeah, next slide, please. This is the question which actually corresponds well with the trends we have in the entire region, but also in Serbia across many years. Very often in the surveys conducted by the Ministry of European Integration, but also the civil societies in Serbia, when the public is asked to rank the threats to security also, but to the general well-being, the corruption is usually high, scores as the first, suggesting that this is probably something that the corruption is what the major link between the macro political concepts and understanding of the public in their everyday life, and probably something which carries the key to the trust in political mobilization in the country. Besides corruption, you can see that the political instability or conflict in the region is something which scores second. However, in comparison to the rest of the region, while corruption is prevalent everywhere, this is something which is lower than in some cases, such as the second one scores high in Kosovo, but also in Northern Macedonia. But then the rest is pretty much the same across the region. Unemployment, crime. You can see that the crime does not score very high in Serbia, and this is again something we've seen over years with the public in Serbia, but also across the Western Balkans region, feeling relatively safe from the traditional threats to the well-being and security, such as everyday crime. In terms of the economy and migration, we again here don't see in terms of this is while the rest of the slides will be pretty much the same as in the previous years and in the rest of the region, this slide is maybe brings some optimism and is also interesting for further explanation, and that's ask whether they are considering moving abroad in the next 2 years. 85% of the Serbian public says no. This is a higher percentage of people considering staying than in the rest of the Western Balkans region. The associated trio, the Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, do have a similar 80+% of people who do not consider moving abroad in the next 2 years, despite the overall situations in their countries, which again, as I said, opens different questions. What brings this stay despite everything situation in these countries? So it might be just the migration fatigue kicking in, which happens across Europe as well, with people not seeing migration as worthwhile in this particular moment. However, in this sense that the situation in Serbia appears better than in the previous years, or as we might discuss later, it might be also the political momentum which also generates this I want to stay here despite the gloomy economic situation and the rest of the problems, as we'll see in the following slides. So if they consider moving abroad, the pull factors and push and pull factors are pretty much the same. They are mirrored. We see that the economic reasons and the overall better future for children is the major driver of emigration from Serbia. And this is, again, something we've seen across years and decades in the Ministry of European Integration surveys as well, when this is also one of the reasons why, which drives the positive image of the EU, the economic reasons and overall good life and the quality of life abroad. We see that corruption is the major push factor, which corresponds to some of the questions mentioned earlier. Finally, this is, as I said, this mirrors pretty much the same what we've seen earlier. What drives them to leave, it's pretty much the same what motivates them to stay. So if economic situation would be better and the rule of law improved, people are motivated to stay in Serbia. So we see pretty much the same story from these last two slides. Yeah, I move on now I pass the floor to Professor Ejdus for the part on the EU, the public sentiments on the external actors.
Thank you, Tijana. So in the next 10 minutes, I will present the results on foreign policy and also one slide on domestic policy, i.e. potential elections. Let me start with the slide which shows the support in Serbia for the membership in the European Union. Here we can see that according to our survey, around 40% of the people are in favor of joining the European Union, which is pretty similar to other surveys and polls that have been conducted in Serbia. I will just compare it to a poll conducted by IRI in May 2024. So before the canopy collapse and the student movement and the student protest, it was also 40%. But interestingly, according to the Eurobarometer survey conducted right before the canopy collapsed in Novi Sad and the beginning of the student protests in September, October 2024, the percentage of the population who supported the membership in the European Union was slightly lower than this. It was 38%. So despite all the turbulences and full 1 year of protests, the support remained pretty constant, if not even getting a little push and bump. Then the second question which we asked in terms of foreign policy was, which country do you regard as the greatest threat to your country's national security? And here we see that the biggest share of respondents pointed out the United States of America as the biggest threat to Serbia's national security. It's 12%. It's closely followed by traditional, let's say, adversaries of Serbia, like England or Croatia, Germany, and then the numbers go really much lower than that. So this is also not unusual, and it corresponds to some of the previous surveys which asked this or similar question. Then the next question is related to Serbia's potential membership in NATO. And here again, we see very high percentage of the population which is against Serbia's membership in NATO. According to our survey, it was 85% who said no, then 9% who said yes, and then the rest is either I don't want to answer or I don't know. This is again very similar to the previous surveys. For instance, the Institute of European Affairs in 2023 measured 76% of the population which did not favor Serbia's membership in NATO, and 10% which was in favor. It means that the support for NATO membership, at least over the past 2 years, might have even gone down a little bit. And we can discuss maybe later why this is so. Then the next question is as follows: other than NATO, with which partners should your country, Serbia, engage more for its national security? And here we see that slightly less than a third of our respondents prefer Russia as the partner to engage with in national security terms. Then the second actor or group of actors which was mentioned is regional cooperation, neighboring countries. Then it was the EU and its members, 14%. Full neutrality and non-alignment, self-reliance, let's call it provisionally some sort of neutrality/isolation is preferred by also 14%. Interestingly, China is very rarely mentioned as the first choice of a partner that Serbia should engage with more in the future. It's only 5% of respondents, but then in total, China is, features quite high as one of the partners that Serbia should engage more in the field of national security. Okay, the next segment is related to external actors more broadly. We asked the respondents, do you believe that the following countries represent a threat to peace and security in Europe? So it's not a threat to Serbia, but more like to a continent and like a regional threat. And here we see that most people, 46%, pointed out United States of America as the greatest threat to peace and security in Europe, followed by Turkey, Russia, and 16%, only 16% who emphasized China as the threat to peace and security. The next question is, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statements? Now, these are two very interesting slides because they show that more people kind of tend to disagree or completely disagree with the potentiality of the recent war or potential war in Europe than the percentage of people who agree with this statement. As you can see, the blue 35% tend to disagree there will be war, 22% completely disagree, and in contrast, only 9% completely agree with this statement and 31% tend to agree. But if you ask them whether they're afraid that if such a war erupts in Europe, whether Serbia will be involved in such a war, you can see that more people tend to agree or completely agree that Serbia will be or would be involved in such a war than the percentage of people who disagree or completely disagree with this statement. And this is something that we can maybe potentially unpack in the discussion as well. Then the next question is, to what extent do you agree with the following statements about the state of the world? And we see that very few people agree that middle powers such as Turkey, Iran, United Arab Emirates are emerging as new centers of power. And then we can see that more people see, first of all, that China is emerging as a new leader of the countries outside of the West. 31% tend to agree, and 36% completely agrees. And also, when it comes to Russia as like the new leader of the countries outside of the West, let's say the leader of the global South, and non-Western world. We see that 29% tends to agree, and 37% completely agrees with this vision of Russia as the new leader of the non-Western world. And lastly, we see that 60% of people either completely agree or tend to agree with the assertion that we are entering an era of my country first, and everybody is looking out for themselves, some sort of dog-eat-dog, zero-sum, conflictual, nationalist world order. Then the next question is, to which actor country do you feel closer regarding values and ideas? And here we see that 36% of respondents pointed out Russia as the country that they feel closest to regarding values and ideas. We didn't specify what values come with certain actors. It was more implicit than explicit. But you can only guess. When it comes to the European Union, 18% of our respondents pointed out the European Union as the actor closest when it comes to values. Only 2% mentioned the United States of America, and 7% mentioned China. So when it comes to values and ideas, the same percentage of people pointed out the United States of America and Turkey, which is 2%. This is also an interesting finding. Then when we asked our respondents, according to you, our country should collaborate more with, it's not a surprise. The biggest percentage of people mentioned Russia, 29%. Then 23% mentioned the European Union, 11% mentioned China, 5% United States of America, and 1% Turkey. The next question concerned economic dependence. We asked our respondents, should our country reduce its economic dependence on the following actors? And here you can see that the biggest share of our respondents mentioned the United States of America as a country that Serbia should reduce its economic dependence on. Then 42% mentioned the European Union, 39% mentioned Turkey, 34% China, and the least number of respondents, 31%, mentioned that Serbia should reduce its economic dependence on Russia. I just wonder whether now, in light of US sanctions against Nice, this picture would change. And then the next question is related to the assessment of our respondents of the Trump administration's policies and its effects on Serbia. We see that despite all the fuss about how the Serbs love Trump, either in America or in Serbia, we see that the picture is still more negative than positive. 35% of the respondents evaluated negatively Trump's administration's policies on Serbia and its impact, and 12% evaluated it positively. It might be the result also of the news around the high tariffs imposed against Serbia during summer, but also maybe some other news that were around over summer and in July when this survey was conducted. What position should Serbia take in the war in Ukraine? I should speed up because my time is running out. 44% said that Serbia should support diplomatic efforts to end the war. We see here that Serbia's position on the war in Ukraine is not that different from what maybe Donald Trump is at least publicly advocating. 38% argues that Serbia should be neutral regarding the war in Ukraine, and only 2% thinks that Serbia should support Ukraine until it wins the war. And 10% support Russia until it wins the war. Then when you ask people whether they agree with Trump's policy, regardless of the response to the previous question, 53% says that they do not support or agree with Trump's policy towards the war in Ukraine, and only 18% answered positively. Another question related to the war in Ukraine is, how does the continuation of war in Ukraine affect the security situation in Serbia? And here we see that the biggest share of respondents actually said that it's neither negative nor positive. But then when we add completely negative to mostly negative, we see that still the balance is rather on the negative side. Only 3% answered mostly positive, and a negligent number of people answered completely positive. Okay, and then finally, we kept the cherry for the very end, cherry on top of everything. It's a question which is highly hypothetical, we all know, but we wanted to know how people in Serbia feel like about the potential parliamentary elections. If they were happening next Sunday, which party or coalition would they vote for? And here we measured that the student list is supported by 26% of the respondents. The ruling Serbian Progressive Party was supported by 22%. Then a coalition of parties which participated in the past election under the coalition called Biramo Borbu, we choose fight, a group of opposition, pro-European opposition parties, was supported by 2%. Pretty much everybody else was either 1% or lower. But then, interestingly, 18% responded that they would not vote, 16% did not want to answer, and 10% answered they don't know. Now, this figure of 18% who would abstain is relatively, I think, stable and corresponds to previous research. But here we have 16% of people who did not want to answer. Normally, in normal circumstances, people who rather avoid to say and express their preference are usually protest voters. But here I would be very cautious to add those 16% entirely to the opposition and to the student list, because the overall climate in the country has changed substantially. And I think at least part of these 16% are actually voters of the Serbian Progressive Party. I don't know to what degree. This is something that we can maybe investigate in further research and cross-tabulations. But even if we extrapolate, if we count the number of people who supported the students and all the opposition, it amounts to some 40% of the entire electorate, or 48% of those who actually voted. And in that case, the 10% who are undecided could actually tip the balance in one direction or the other. With this, I would stop and I would hand over back to Tijana. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As said, please, if you have any questions, and write them down in the chat, or remember them for the Q&A session, which is coming soon. So now we move on to the key findings from the social media sentiment analysis. Dr. Panagiotis, Paschalidis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Panagiotis Paschalidis. Today I'm presenting a part of our sentiment analysis on social media in different countries. And I have to clarify that I participate in this project as a research associate for SEERC, which is the Southeast European Research Center in Thessaloniki. Thank you for being here. And if we can move to the next slide. Thank you. The time is, yes. Thank you. Now I've prepared some introductory remarks about the methodology and some specifications. Before presenting the findings, I cannot miss to refer to all these elements. Now, this is a part of what we are implementing, the social media sentiment analysis. The objective is to quantify and interpret public affect dispositions towards the 5 international actors, European Union, United States, Russia, China, and Turkey, and to focus primarily on X, formerly Twitter, and also Facebook. The countries that we implement this analysis are Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. Now you have also an idea about the size of our sample. It's in total is between 36 and 37,000 tweets and Facebook posts, and per country. In Serbia, for instance, we managed to collect close to 6,000 tweets and posts. Ukraine obviously was the biggest sample. Also, it reflects the difference in the size of the population. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. Now, about the methodology, we follow basic premises of NLP, of natural language processing, which is a quantitative methodology. And we use RStudio as the software and the environment in which we apply this analysis through a process of perfecting and improving codes and commands for the different stages of the analysis. I will go back into this aspect. Also to refer to the period of study. This was the months of February and March 2025. We used 3 key events as reference points for data collection and loss analysis. These were the following: was the speech by Vice President J.D. Vance in the Munich Security Conference on 14th of February, the meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky in the White House on 28th of February, and the third was the EU Council regarding defense and also Ukraine on the 6th of March. So we have results for each of these sub periods, and also results, general results for the whole of this period. And also the interest here is also to capture the fluctuation of the sentiment from event to event. Thank you. If we can move to the next. Thank you. Yes. Now, for the data collection, we used the AP5 platform, which provides several tools and applications for social media scraping, content scraping. Now, the idea in the beginning was to rely on hashtags, but it became clear very soon that this would not be very fruitful in terms of securing to collect sufficient sample. So we instead used the hashtags as search terms in a combined way in order to obtain a relevant sample for analysis. And also another important part, the very strict geolocation specifications, in order to make sure that we obtained tweets and Facebook posts from people actually living in the country that we studied. Now, for the protocol for analysis, it was a lexicon-based approach. We used several of the available packages for sentiment analysis: the Harvard, the Vader, the Textpol, also Berta. I forgot to mention. Why we did that? In order to obtain cross-validation. So it's an aggregate sentiment scoring. We don't rely only on one of these packages. Various phases for the analysis, such as top words removal. Very important also the creation of subsets for each actor with specific references, taking the proposition as a unit in order to make sure that we score only the relevant part of the content for each actor. And also, of course, the translation using all available tools. There are many limitations, as you can imagine: the size of the sample, the consistency of the sentiment scoring, the translation variability, the disinformation detection. I have to clarify, in this study, we don't focus on disinformation because we have a separate study that will follow after this sentiment analysis. Thank you. To the next one. Thank you very much. Now, this is one of the first findings that I would like to present. It's mainly the it shows the amount of tweets, posts, and eventually references found in these tweets and posts. We have it for X and Facebook separately, and we see that, for instance, on X, Russia was the most discussed, or the most referred to actor, followed by the US, then the EU, and China and Turkey very limited number of tweets and also references. For Facebook, I forgot to mention, very important, that we focused only on one of the three events. It was the Trump-Zelensky meeting. So we have, in this case, as in others, a more limited sample, which we used in order to also cross-validate and see the difference that we obtained in terms of results. But this was a very, I would say, standard. Always Russia and the US, in all countries, they occupied the two first positions. Who can go to the next one? Yes. No, this is the general sentiment score for all actors, presented separately for X and Facebook. We see, for instance, that if we focus only on X, we have a slightly more negative scoring for Russia. We have a more balanced scoring for the US. The EU is clearly negative. China and Turkey very, very positive. But for China and Turkey, we have the fewest tweets to analyze. So it's also analyzing this further. We can also look at the Facebook results, where we have the reversal. We have a positive, clearly positive scoring for Russia, a clearly negative scoring for the US, and also a more negative scoring for the EU. So the first this sentiment analysis study, we don't want to rush to judgment about the significance of the findings. We like to see them in a more combined way. So the first sorry? Oh, it's a microphone. Oh, sorry. Thank you. If we can go once more to the next slide with the results. I think there's a microphone. Sorry. Yes. So in this case, for instance, we see that on both platforms, the result that merits very special attention, I think, in my opinion, is the negative scoring for the EU, because we see that in Russia changes from platform to platform, and also the US changes from platform to platform, even though on X it's very difficult to say. In generally speaking, when we have very small margins between, let's say, positive and negative scoring, it's very risky to make a judgment, a definite judgment about the result. Yes, we can go to the next one. Thank you. The next slide, please. Thank you so much. So here you can see the development, the fluctuation of the scoring from event to event. We see, for instance, that once again, if you go straight to the EU, you have the most impressive fluctuation from negative to very negative, and also from rather balanced, positive and negative to very very sharp decrease of positive views in the end of the period. whereas also for the United States, you have the same decrease in positive, and also for Russia. But as I mentioned, this I think we should combine it with Facebook in order to have a deeper understanding. Yes, we can go to the next one. Yes, so this is a way to think deeper, always from the empirical standpoint about the EU results. So what we performed is a series of cross tabulations for the sentiments for EU, Russia, and the United States in order to detect all the probabilities and patterns of correlation and dependence. So we took all the pairs and all the available results, and what came out is very interesting, I think, is that the sentiment, the negative sentiment for the EU is the one that's the most weak in terms of correlation, comparing to the other actors, United States and Russia. It varies independently, meaning that no matter if we have a positive or negative for Russia, or positive or negative for the United States, the negative EU sentiment was the most invariable. This perhaps is a way of suggesting, always from the standpoint of our results, that it doesn't matter how the social media users were expressing other views and sentiments for the other actors, but the negative for the EU was the most consistent. And this regards the part of the data, the tweets that contained multiple references to more than one actor. So it's the most relevant part of our sample. Yes, and the last one, the last slide. So I would suggest that from this study, to the main takeaways is the predominantly negative sentiment towards the EU across both platforms, the differentiation of sentiment for United States and Russia across the two platforms, and also the modest yet bigger correlation of sentiments towards the United States and Russia. Indeed, in our sample, we found there's a modest but existent positive correlation between United States and Russia. For instance, in the positive sentiment, when there was a positive sentiment for the one, also there was in quite a few occasions there was also positive for the other. So that's another thing to further explore. And in our case also, I would say that we didn't have a way to dissociate or produce different results according to, for instance, the leader of the country, because in many cases we have positive tweets for Donald Trump, which were with no other reference to the country. So we had also very negative in other cases. So the same for Putin. For instance, in the case of the EU, we don't have a similar case. So, but we chose to keep these tweets and posts within the sample of the country, instead of producing a different set of results. So thank you for your attention. That was the sentiment analysis for Serbia. And also I want to say that it's a work in progress. There will be a report for all countries that we studied, and some more combined results. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting insights, which complement the picture we've heard previously about the public attitudes on external actors. So we are moving to the final part of our presentations, and that's actually the discussant remarks by Dr. Sonja Stojanovic-Gajic. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tijana. Thank you guys for listening for us for almost an hour. So I'm the last speaker, and I have this freedom of not diving that much into numbers, but more into interpretation. So no PowerPoint presentation in front of me, but I have three messages I wanted to share. One is related to the youth and potential of hope that the findings related to young people, both in our GEO-POWER survey, but also in surveys done by the Platform Youth Organization of Serbia show. So youth are the only group in Serbian society that has a bit more pro-EU attitude than those against. So young people, there are 45% who are pro-EU membership and 43% are against. So it's close, but that's the only group that is more in favor. And this, I have heard, has been also confirmed by the research that Institute for Social Theory and Philosophy has done with the students that were active in protest. This number even increased. So those that got mobilized in protest seem to be more Euro enthusiastic than the rest of population. The closest to them are their parents. So the generation 45 to 50 has 45% pro and 46% against. So it's even more evenly divided, but I would say that's the biggest percentage pro. And you can guess who is the most anti-EU beyond the grandparents, so people who are 65%. It's actually the younger brothers and sisters of the students. So the generation that has from 25 to 35, there we have more than 50%, 55% against EU membership, and only 1/3 pro-EU membership. So that's very interesting to discuss this generational dynamic. Also important points for the youth that we have seen, they are the biggest group of those that consider leaving country, still less represented than in North Macedonia or Montenegro or some of the other countries covered by GEO-POWER. But what is worrying that urban youth and educated youth is twice more likely to leave the country than those from the rural areas, which again brings us back to students. And most likely the outcome, if the protests fail, that we'll have another exodus and even increased brain drain. And the last point about the youth and the hope is related to the research done by the National Youth Platform that has shown the increase in support for democracy as a political system for 20%, decrease in support for strong leaders, and decrease in support for compulsory military service, which are all huge shifts in just course of a year in comparison to a decade and more than this kind of research is done. So this would be my one trigger, which is linked to our research. And now I just want to briefly address the anti-Western attitudes that Filip has presented. He has written about how much past traumas can be built in who we are and why we nurture them to keep the continuity with the past. I don't want to go into history. I just want to mention this two other surveys that complement our and might explain why Serbia stands out in comparison to the rest of all polled countries when it comes to anti-Western attitudes. One, in regards to the EU, across the political orientation, across the group, age groups, across the regions, majority of people are against lithium exploitation, which is supported by the EU and assigned as a strategic project by the EU. So this has been a big mobilizer, I would say, that has happened in last few years, but especially this year when the EU decided to assign Jadar project in Western Serbia as a strategic project. The other reason is that we don't have free media, but the media is run by the ruling political party. And there the research shows, and I'm going to share in a minute in a chat, the survey conducted by CERTA, that the most positive image is portrayed of Russia and China, and most negative of EU. And this has been trend for a couple of years. But what has changed since the election of Trump is that the negative portrait of EU has increased for 60%. So the negative coverage of EU in Serbian media under the control of Serbian Progressive Party has increased for 60%, while the positive image of US has increased for 184%. So the government really tries to portray US in the best possible way. And in a news which are dominated by one person only, and that's Alexander Vučić, if the US is mentioned along with Vučić, it's always in positive way, and EU in negative way. And my last point, and I'll stop here, I think one policy concern that we should have, especially with this survey for Serbia's future, is related to potential of Serbia being security partner to the EU. Until recently, Serbia has been very much integrated with EU in defense area, in internal security area, had more developed institutional mechanisms of cooperation than any other countries. Now that the strategic partnerships have been signed with Albania, Moldova, and Ukraine, this is no longer the case, but more importantly, this distrust in Western partners that is, as I mentioned, promoted by ruling elites will make it more difficult also to the Western partners to trust and cooperate with Serbia in security field, which I think we all agree is one of the top policy concerns in Europe these days. So I'll stop here and hopefully we'll have a discussion now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this super interesting and thought-provoking insights. I would ask the Professor Ejdus or the rest of the team who is with us today of the GEO-POWER team from Serbia and other partner countries to, if they have any remarks, thoughts, immediate thoughts, or maybe we can move to the Q&A session. If no, so there is one question in chat about, so Panayota Manoli asks, how can one may explain the pro-EU views of youth on the one hand and the high EU negative sentiment in social media? Does anyone from the team wants to respond? I have my thoughts, my initial thoughts on this. Yes.
I would like, but please go ahead if you yes, after you.
Yes, my initial thoughts are just general thoughts on how social media content is what goes viral are negative sentiments, and the negative sentiments are usually more engaging, and also there is this idea that of the youth which is silently pro-EU in a sense of appreciating the benefits of the EU membership for Serbia, but not being very happy to share this on social media in a sense of it's not really a popular thing to do. And there is another thing which comes to my mind, and that's the social media is usually that these discussions, especially the ones which go viral and attract engagement, are triggered by some events. And as Sonia earlier mentioned, the recent period and years in Serbia have been marked by the events, including the Rio Tinto mining thing, but also the current political situation which do not really attract positive sentiment to the EU, but are actually engaging the public, which has strong resentments about the EU in terms of the Rio Tinto being supportive and in terms of the current political crisis being silent. So these are my initial thoughts on this question, but please, Dr. Paschalidis, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and Panagiotis Manoli, also thank you for the question. And I think also Sonia Gajic also provided very insightful remarks about this issue that could explain a bit further. From my point of view, which is the empirical, I would also like to reinstate the finding that the negative feeling for the EU was most of the times we found it by itself, not correlated with others. So it was perhaps more structural. I cannot, of course, say that definitely it's something deeper, but I would say that it was more, let's say, clearly stated. Whereas in the case of the United States and Russia, I could really sense that in the data sets that because I control the results and see big parts of it, you could sense that there was this Trump effect, which was the context of the specific period that we studied the social media use. Now, in my understanding, in that particular month, as I remember, we also had we had protests in Serbia. Also, we had the issue with Romania. I know here there are people much more knowledgeable about these things, but I have the feeling that this also was a factor that affected the negative sentiment towards the EU. That, from my perspective, I can also. Yes, Sonia.
Yeah, I don't have a concrete answer. I'm waiting for this research by Institute of Social Theory and Philosophy to be published. But one thing that comes to my mind, how student protests contributed actually to the EU. Although there was clear agreement not to have any foreign flags, no EU flags, but just Serbian flag and so on. There was a lot of coverage in social media, which was the main source of information, both for students and the youth and the population, because the government controlled media did not cover protests. But in social media, actions of solidarity in the region, in the countries of the EU, with the protests were very popular, very shared. And I think they also contributed to kind of interethnic closeness in our region, and especially once the students organized the cycling to Strasbourg and running to Brussels, actions where they were welcomed both by Serbian diaspora, but also by ordinary people. So, there was a lot of coverage of how Croats welcome into their homes Serbian students, spend the night with them, and so on. Same in Germany, how a German with no link to Serbia gave his company and a pool and everything for students and made sure that those that were fasting would have appropriate food and so on. So I thought that these symbolic actions were really viral and also impacted a bit perception of the EU.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? Okay, I think we don't have any additional questions in chat.
Yeah.
So if
I have one if no one else wants to.
yes, please.
But because if anyone else has any comment, I can wait.
I think for now you're fine. Thank you. You can ask the question.
Okay. Thanks a lot to start with for presenting us the results of the opinion poll for Serbia. To be honest, I'm not very familiar. I'm not at all familiar with the results of other similar polls and surveys that have taken place. But one thought that I would like to share with you, and maybe you can comment on that, is whether the survey somehow reaffirms an exceptional, unique case of Serbia in terms of its political, identity, orientation, etc., or on the contrary, it indicates that at the moment the society in Serbia is in search of a new political direction. And I'm saying that because I have written down only, I think, two figures out of what you've mentioned. okay, the fact that 27% don't feel close to any actor in terms of values, etc. I think this is something. And then also a large number, I can't remember the exact percentage, wouldn't vote, etc. So they are thinking of, they have not taken any certain decision on how they want to act in future elections. And a couple of other, or they don't want to reply. And I remember I had a couple of other percentages that indicate this lack of a clear political direction on where the country should move towards. Thank you. So do you think there is something new here, or just we just confirm pre-existing indications and surveys? And we've seen also, new actors mentioned, especially China, etc. Thank you. That's a thought.
Thank you very much. I see that Professor Ejdus has raised his hand, and Sonia as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Renata, for this excellent question. I think when it comes to Serbia's foreign policy orientation, there is nothing spectacularly new in our research. Figures about the support to NATO membership and the EU membership are relatively stable. I think there is a trend to have the support for the EU membership to go down and the opposition to NATO membership to go up over the years. But we haven't seen any significant changes over the past 10 months or so. What we did see, I think, with this research and with some other surveys conducted over the summer or over the past couple of months, is that domestically the tide is turning. That the regime is continuing to lose the support, that we have a totally new actor on the scene, which is the student list. We have almost annihilation of the opposition, which no single party from the traditional opposition would pass the lower threshold of 3%, let alone the old 5% threshold. So we see a total rearrangement on the domestic scene, and we see that this student list has relatively stabilized their support. There was a recently research by Nova Srpska Politička Misao, which shows that the support for the students is relatively stable and is ahead of the support for the ruling party by a couple of percent. And this is probably the reason why the regime doesn't want to call for snap elections, because they would have to orchestrate even higher degree of electoral manipulations than in the previous elections. When we compared Serbia to other surveys, because as stated at the beginning of this session, we did the same survey in 9 countries, the Western Balkans and post-Soviet space, we see that Serbia is really an outlier when it comes to foreign policy orientation. All other countries which are candidate countries for the EU membership, some in advanced process of accession negotiation, have much higher support for NATO, for the EU, for the Western values than in Serbia. Serbia is, in that respect, an exception. It was an exception previously, and it continues to be the exception despite these domestic turbulences and rearrangements. And the $1 million question is whether this domestic rearrangement of the public opinion away from the regime of Alexander Vučić will at some point in the future also have knock-on effects on the higher support for the EU. I think this is very difficult question. It also depends on the outcome of this struggle and also on the reaction of the Western powers and especially the European Union to the future developments in Serbia.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stojanovic, you guys, I think your hand was raised as well.
Yeah, I mean, Filip said the main thing. I wanted also to say that foreign policy, no big change. I might want to add one point. I think in contrast to our neighbors and colleagues in Eastern Europe, Serbia's public opinion on big powers resembles more the public opinion in global South countries than in the rest of Europe. And there is an interesting research done by European Council of Foreign Relations at the beginning of war in Ukraine, where really Serbian results were more similar to the results in South Africa or India. Not necessarily just pro-Russian, but against the big players. But there is continuity when it comes to foreign policy. But as Filip said, we have a revolution when it comes to domestic policy. This survey that we didn't ask many questions about the participation in political life. It just asked about the voting. But the other surveys that have been done in the last couple of months document really a sharp rise in mobilization of citizens, not just ready to vote, but also to organize and to continue protesting and fighting for their rights. For me, the key question is, because students so far avoid foreign policy issues, they don't think that's priority. They are not going to put it as a part of their campaign if the elections are called. They're focusing domestic issues. And these issues are also more divisive. The foreign policy domestically are more divisive than the other issues. The key thing is how EU will respond to that. Will it continue favoring predictable partner that scares them with lack of support for EU integration but delivers weapons to Ukraine and Israel, or they will accept a bit of ambiguity and give time for domestic things to be sorted out first.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up thought on this about the changes in the domestic policy, but also which might reflect on the foreign policy as well, is that we will look at the surveys, and that's an optimistic reading of the survey results. We see that the public sends a message, which is a change. The things which have changed in comparison to the previous year's survey results is that they don't like how the situation is, what the situation looks like at the moment and what is ahead of, in that sense, Serbia. They don't like the current situation, but they don't want to necessarily leave, which is again another big change and something which distinguishes Serbia from the rest of the region, at least in this moment. And in that sense, Serbia's results are more similar, which is puzzling and I guess something worth exploring, more similar to the survey results in Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, so the countries in war or in the proximity of war zones, which from the perspective of the rally around the flag has some kind of effect in this moment. And then however, they're still hopeful. So they don't like the current situation. They still want to stay, and they are hopeful about cautiously hopeful about the situation in the upcoming years. And in connection to what Sonia has said about these tectonic changes in the political culture of youth, in a sense that for years and years, there was a majority of students or youth who would say they do like the optimal political system for Serbia is democracy, but with the iron fist, the democracy with strong-handed democracy. So This year, this is a drop in close to 30%, correct me if I'm wrong, and this is a tectonic change in the political country, in the political culture in Serbia. And that being said, in terms of the question posed in the chat, the final one about the dominant understanding of the national identity in the electorate, as Sonia has said, there is this concern and anxiety about whether the student list or the students will be Eurosceptic, because so far they've sidelined the foreign policy and they've said this is something we'll deal with once we restore democracy and rule of law. But the only platform so far they made public did not avoided in a way using the term of European integration, and they just smuggled it in with this concept of the regional integration and Europe. So there is this concern whether this this silence will transform into the Eurosceptic views. I myself, again, I'm giving a hopeful reading of the situation and the results. I believe that we've witnessed some kind of decoupling of the Europeanization and democratization process in Serbia in rhetorics by the student movement. In a sense, they're saying we can democratize not without Europeanizing, but we can democratize without calling it Europeanization. And I see it as, in a way, as a symbolic struggle and their symbolic reclaim of the democracy and of the state as well. We've call it a captured state. So I believe that this can actually be a promising thing in terms of the local ownership of democracy and Europeanization and European values in Serbia. It might not end up like this, and who knows, the elections and electoral campaigns are a weird beast, and who knows what we'll see. But so far, I would give them students at least as a movement, if we can at all treat them as a homogeneous entity, and we cannot. I would give them benefit of a doubt in terms of not moving towards the nationalistic messages in the upcoming period. Again, this is my hopeful reading. If we don't have more questions, and it's already an hour and a half, we would really like to thank you for sticking with us today and showing up for our online event, and to invite you to follow our pages, follow our website. I think it was shared at the beginning. Maybe we can once again copy the link to our website when you can keep following the research outputs of this project, and keep coming to our events. And we promise to use this survey, but also the rest of the insights we've been collecting with mixed methodology, very rich methodology, as you've seen, through sentiment analysis, as everything else, to produce some research-driven and research-informed policy recommendations to make our society and the entire, both regions and the EU, more responsible and better actors and better places to live in. Thank you.